On the Throttle is brought to you by Sport Bike Wrench. Performance parts, professional advice.
Sometimes reasons to short shift and not rev out RPM could be things get busy. So it's hard for me to change direction, hold steady throttle, or accelerate, try to get a shift in while I'm doing all these things. A lot of times things get busy, so you have to time things. You have to decide what's the best route to go. Also, sometimes it's motorcycle dependent. Sometimes a bike will handle a section in third better than second, let's say. If I ran second gear through an area with some bumps and I find myself at peak horsepower, close to peak torque in the RPM range, it can very easily upset the motorcycle. Create something, if it spins, it gets really big, really fast. The reaction of it from the motorcycle is big. Where if I'm third and I lug it, if I'm below peak torque, maybe it hits that bump and the bike doesn't quite, it's not in its prime range, so it can't grow really big and cause a big mistake. Just kind of settles the bike down for me, makes it easier for me to ride it well. We spend quite a bit of time working on things like that, like where are you in the RPM range and how is that going to affect the bike? I've always been one, I am less afraid to spin the tire at 13,000 RPM than I am at 8,000 RPM. If I spin the tire at 8,000 RPM on a 1,000, I'm getting really close to peak torque right underneath it. So it has the ability to spin up really fast and gain a lot of RPM, which means a lot of mile per hour, makes it really, really hard to catch. If I spin a tire at 13,000 RPM, it can only gain another 1,000 RPM and it's at the rev limiter. So the speed, wheel speed change can't get so big, I have a better chance of keeping the bike in line and saving it. A lot of things like that we have to think about and figure out. Experience, have a lot of laps. Learning new tracks is kind of my favorite thing. I'll ride every new motocross track I can get to, go-kart track, road race course. If I can go to somewhere new, I'm usually the first one in line. Hey, let's go try something new. I think all of us have a process. I never really sit down and think about too much about how it goes, but I think Ben's definitely right. First, you have to figure out the radius of every turn and where its apex is. You have to look at what comes before and after it. And I think one of the other things that I tend to go through really quickly is finding my brake markers. Gives me a good idea of where I'm capable of. If I get that kind of out of the way and have a range of, okay, I know I'm pretty close here, I start feeling comfortable and start working on my exits after that. Most of it is just figuring out, looking at every turn and going, what kind of turn is this? What is it? What leads into it, and what's after it? What's the most important aspect of this turn? Is this a entrance turn, an exit turn, or a balance turn? What's the most important thing? How can I take a shallow entrance into this? New Jersey Motorsports Park. I don't know if you guys watched that race on TV. There was this section of track where you had a really long right-hander that you accelerated, then it was a decreasing radius. And you came out of it, just about put your foot down speeds and went into this long left-hander. Ideally, most of the time I would have probably tried a double apex kind of thing where I would have charged into it, run wide, slowed down mid-turn and got a big exit off of it. But the exit wasn't very good. Every time I thought it was time to get on the gas, it was too early and ended up bouncing off the next curb on the right. With that being said, I started looking at things a little bit differently. I just started slowing down and I started rolling good corner speed around the whole thing and just waiting for my exit so I could have a smooth exit and hit my marks every time. And so to look at it, I would have thought it was one way. To ride it in practice, I've kind of felt that I found it was a different way. Sorting these kind of things out are all parts of learning the racetrack. It's hard for me to pick a specific thing and say, oh, I do this, this, and this, because you have a lot of things going on at once. The perfect thing is I have a lot of practice at it. So I'm able to sort a lot of these things out in a very short period of time. I heard a lot of guys say, oh, you got to play the video game, you got to do this, do that. I really don't. I think we're visual, and it's I don't think I could look at, if you handed me a track map and told me numbers of what gears to be in, I might be able to memorize what gears there are, but I would have so much input coming at me that I would probably still do the shifting. Because of practice, I can do by feel. I have a pretty good idea of how my motorcycle works. No two motorcycles are exactly the same. So I think I am pretty self-confident that I can go out and figure it out better than someone can tell me most of the time. I enjoy that. If you're going to be a racer, figuring these things out for yourself are going to be key to being able to lead and run at the front of a race. You can follow people all day long and go pretty fast. It's another thing when you got to be out front showing the way around. You got to figure out how to go fast for yourself and why you're fast. But, you know, I was pretty fortunate at the World Supersport stuff that they allowed us to go on the racetrack the day before on a scooter or walk around it, whatever it may be. And quite honestly, I could sit back and look at things and get a pretty good idea, you know, from experience. I've ridden enough racetracks, I can look at it and say, oh, wow, that kind of reminds me of this turn at this racetrack. And put the pieces together. So I would show up, when I showed up at Vallelunga in Italy, I'd never seen it on TV, I'd never seen it, I'd just never seen the racetrack. I had no idea what I was getting into. The guys gave me a track map with gear positions of what their rider had done the year before. And there were some things that helped. But then I went out on a scooter and I must have done 15 laps for the day. And though it wasn't at speed, had a pretty good idea. I said, oh, okay, I can see how this is going to flow together like that, and this is going to happen, and I visualized it a lot. And when I did my first laps, it didn't feel like the first time I was seeing the racetrack, because I had a pretty fair idea of how things were going to go. That's a huge difference actually between me and my teammate. Ben Bostrom works on sections of the racetrack. He'll go work on we get segments times. If we came here to this racetrack, they would break it up into 3 or 4 segments and give us a lap time per segment. That is also something we get to a useful tool to see if we're slow in one part of the racetrack. So they may have a segment between 4 and 5, and then a segment in the attitudes, and then to here. So I'd have 3 segments. And Ben will actually go out and work on one segment and then kind of cruise through the next 2 thinking about the first one, and then go hammer head down through that one again. For me, that doesn't work. He'll wait till the end of the session to put 1 lap together to see where it puts him on the list. I don't take that chance. I feel I'm more of a rhythm rider. I'm a hard worker. Takes me a little longer to get going. So I'm going to go out and try to focus on putting laps together. One thing that I felt changed as my career started to grow was the amount of time I could focus. I remember being a novice, and I looked back at this like 2 or 3 years later and said, wow, you know what? I remember having turns on a racetrack. That's my turn. No one's going to beat me there. And focusing so hard in that part of the track that I just couldn't put that same amount of focus on the rest of the racetrack. So I could do 1 turn in a weekend. And then a year later, I had practiced enough that now I could focus and put a lap together with that same intensity. But out of a 10-lap race, I could put 1 lap together like that. And over time, it's built up to a few more laps, to where now I can put a pretty good race together at a pretty high intensity. So for me, practice enough, I think, that I go out there and I tend to just bang out laps. And I probably spend more time on the racetrack than any other superbike rider. In the last 4 races, generally, every practice session, when we get our rundown sheet of lap times, I had more laps in the books than any other competitor out there. I'd come in 1 time, maybe twice in a 50-minute session. First session of the weekend, I'd go out and I'd ride. I'd come in, I'd make 1 good educated change to the motorcycle, go out and do another big long session where I'd do 6 or 8 laps, 10 laps, come in, we'd try a new tire, make 1 more change, and I'd finish out the session like that. Generally, I would ride in a 50-minute session between 18 and 25 laps. Most people were in the 15 to 20 maybe. I had done as many as 28, 30 laps before, depending on the length of the racetrack. So I tend to get out there and try to get the work done. We only get a limited amount of time on racetrack. I'm going to take advantage of that and get as many of those laps in as I can and make it their money's worth, get their money's worth out of it. So